I just wanted to pick up on Tim's point about community-driven governance, which I think was a really nice phrase, and turn it around in the sense of not just focusing it on the local government in terms of, for example, the Indian government, but also to what extent can we turn that community-driven governance onto global institutions that, as Madhu said, perhaps in the sense that when Indian bureaucrats come to first world countries, they learn about how not to do things, perhaps. So is there a role to actually change global institutions that have contributed to our planning policies, who our planning is to benefit, for example, the middle class as opposed to poor people? And I just remember, and thinking of Ian's question about good other examples, we had a marvellous former mayor from Bogota that was brought by the WA Ministry of Planning to Perth last year. Enrique, I can't remember his name. Can you remember Sally? Enrique Palamoso or something like that. Anyway, he was from the former mayor from Bogota and talked about the way they had totally reshaped Bogota by focusing on the needs of the poor, and because of that had transformed the city in a really positive way. So I just wonder if you have any suggestions for how we might pick up on that community-driven governance and learn from people and the vibrance of third world cities. Thanks.
Let me say very quickly, one of the mysteries of life, I think Karl Popper put it best, was it doesn't matter which class the rulers are drawn from. Once they're rulers, they're part of the ruling class. And it's amazing how politics, you lose sometimes the vision and the roots, and we see it right across. The issue you've raised is the issue really for a sustainable 21st century. Where is the architecture of global governance? Whether it's dealing with the great agendas of climate change and poverty or urbanisation. And at the moment, apart from a G20, which is better than a G7 or 8, the critical issue dealing with financial interdependence is we don't particularly have global governance architecture. We know that the Millennium Development Goals and their achievement has actually been faltering because despite promises that are made by individual countries, there's no enforcer. Countries haven't been, by and large, keeping their promises in terms of the world's poor. Yet we can find amazing money when we call something a crisis, the financial crisis. Isn't it staggering? You know, Bush has his stimulus package, Obama finds $1 trillion, Kevin, he's found $42 billion. You know, I would have thought 26,000 kids dying each day of preventable disease and hunger, we might have called a crisis. I would have thought some of the issues that we're dealing with in terms of the world's poor and urbanisation, we might actually call a crisis and deal with. But where is the enforcer? Where is the global governance? At the moment, it's still not there.
Could I just come in on that? I think that the Cities Alliance that I mentioned attempts to help cities learn from each other, and probably not learning developed countries to developing, but sharing, you know, some people call the South-South relationship. Enrique, who you mentioned, I know he's used extensively by the World Bank and taken around to share his experience. And I think one of the most famous things he did, if you like, was introduce bus rapid transit systems in Bogota. Now, I've just come from Jakarta. Even in Jakarta, they've adopted a bus rapid transit system, and Hanoi was introducing one. So I think it's examples like that, and Cities Alliance allows that kind of thing. So the experience of Cape Town and the sort of, since the Mandela time and what they've done in the townships there, I think there's a lot to learn. Other countries have got a lot to learn, particularly other countries in Africa, from that.
Hi, it's Carl Benning. We haven't talked a lot tonight about another grand social experiment, which is the emergence of cities in China, where in some ways the market has been greatly liberated, but other choices perhaps not. Is there any comment on the Chinese experience?
You know, as far as the Chinese experiment is concerned, the world has a way of kowtowing before economic success. Even the horrendous things they do, which is controlled migration, is today become for many third world tin pot dictators the way to do things. And many bureaucrats in India would like to have similar permit system for, I mean, they actually, in all seriousness, I hear several bureaucrats, senior bureaucrats say, but in China, they don't even let you come. And when you extend the logic to them and say, where did you come from? You migrated from Chennai to Delhi. I'd love to throw you out. So the point that I'm making is that when that becomes the key criteria for considering a society successful or not so, then you allow a lot of horrible things to happen. And coming to this whole business of community wisdom and community organizing, while our colonial rulers were control freaks through the bureaucratic methods, and they passed horrendous laws, which is what we are still saddled with, and we haven't put our act together to fix those laws. Our present regime, it's our politicians who are control freaks. And it's they who make it very difficult for communities to organize any independent initiative, organizational initiative, which is not patronized by them, where they're not asked to preside over and patronize, they're extremely suspicious of, and they do their best to destroy it. They're extremely suspicious of citizens organizing. If anything that has kept Indian democracy alive despite a corrupt bureaucracy and venal politicians, a good number of them, many good ones too, and many outstanding bureaucrats too, it is the much reviled caste system. Because even the poor, through the caste and kinship networks, are not isolated, atomized individuals. They have these networks, functioning networks, so that when something goes wrong, it's immediately, no matter how low down your caste status, it's your caste group in numbers that will come to protect you. And that, in fact, also during elections, the poor, many liberals in India bemoan the fact that people vote for their caste community leaders, but they are important buffers, and so in fact India is one of the few countries in the world where community organization has taken the form of caste kinship mobilization, and where the bottom has come to the top through the electoral process. We have Dalit chief minister aspiring to be prime minister. Almost all chief ministers of all states today are from what are called backward or most backward castes because of sheer numbers and the ability to mobilize. So in that sense, what you call community mobilization in India takes that form. It has its negatives as well as lots of positives.
I think China is one of the few, I don't know if it's still counted as a developing country, but I'm sure it'd be insulted if you called it that. But I think it's one of the few developing countries that has actually gone out and embraced their urbanization because it was part of their economic policy. I think where the corruption, the worst corruption in China is in the land conversion, where poor rural people are basically, land is when it's converted to urban land, it's the value is 20, 30, who knows how many times, and the original, the people who are originally using the land don't get any of that benefit. But ironically, I think the party is very concerned about that, and it's actually the petty bureaucrats who are, they're undermining. The party feels they're being undermined, and I know certainly the World Bank is working with some in Sichuan, looking at ways where the increased value, the betterment value, can be more equitably shared. So I think there's initiatives like that are encouraging.
I'd just say that China is both the best and the worst in every sense. The best part is that from 1990, The percentage of population living on less than $1.25 a day has dropped from 60% to about 20%. And a lot of that's because of urbanisation. The rural areas are still terrible poverty. The worst part of that is also the cost of that in terms of freedoms, and we're going to see whether climate change and post-Kyoto is going to see China sign up. World Vision is active in China. As part of me, I have to say, knowing that China's going to be the dominant economic power by 2030, part of me going, do we want to help them anymore? There's a certain, fear also about China. So it's a very ambivalent case.